Having reached the end of the mystery stories from our first book covering the southwest of the United Kingdom, we move a little further afield and travel east. Welcome to Season 2 of Sunday Night Mystery. The book to accompany this season will be available soon, and I'll keep you up to date. Tonight, we journey back to the February of 1985, to the genteel town of Cheltenham in Gloucestershire. Amongst its tree-lined streets and cobblestone paths, a crime so savage and incomprehensible shattered the peace of Roman Road. I'm Brett, and this is the story of Constance Aris, a 73-year-old widow whose life was stolen in a moment of unfathomable brutality. Her murder remains unsolved nearly 4 decades later, a shadow that refuses to fade. But what happened that night? Who could commit such a heinous act, and why? To answer these questions, we must descend into a labyrinth of mystery, fear, and unanswered questions. February the 28th of 1985 dawned like any other late winter day in Cheltenham. Grey skies, damp air, and a fog so thick it muffled the town like a shroud. Keith Aris had a restless night. Something gnawed at the edge of his mind. His mother, Constance, hadn't called. She was a woman of routine, her days measured by the comforting rituals of tea, letters, and check-ins with her family. As the morning wore on, the silence became unbearable. Keith and his wife Vanessa decided to visit her home in Roman Road. Their drive was uneventful, the fog curling like ghostly tendrils around the car, yet an inexplicable tension built with every mile. When they arrived, Constance's house seemed unnervingly still. The curtains hung closed, the garden undisturbed, but there was something about the silence that felt wrong. Keith's hand trembled as he inserted the key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a house frozen in eerie quiet. A faint hum from the television broke the silence, its static-filled glow casting long shadows across the walls. Keith called his mother's name. His voice echoed down the narrow hallway, but there was no answer. The sitting room door was ajar, a sliver of muted light spilling out. Keith stepped in, and what he saw wrenched the air from his lungs. Constance's body slumped in her favourite armchair, her small frame swallowed by its upholstery. Her head lolled unnaturally to one side, her eyes half open but unseeing. The walls were streaked with crimson, the ceiling flecked with arterial spray. A coppery tang filled the air, an odour so thick it seemed to cling to their skin. Vanessa let out a strangled cry and staggered backward, her hand over her mouth. Keith fell to his knees, unable to tear his gaze from the grotesque tableau before him. This wasn't just a murder, it was a statement. The killer had made sure of that. When investigators arrived, they were confronted by a crime of unparalleled brutality. Constance had been struck at least 5 times with a heavy, sharp object, most likely an axe. Her skull was fractured, her ribcage shattered. The sheer force of the blows suggested an attacker fueled by unbridled rage. Yet the scene was also chillingly calculated. The weapon had been brought to the house, used with precision, and then taken away, leaving no trace. Constance's injuries told a horrifying story. Defensive wounds on her hands and arms showed that she tried to fight back, raising her frail limbs in a futile attempt to ward off the attack. The first blow likely rendered her unconscious. The subsequent strikes were overkill, deliberate, savage, and unnecessary. This was not the work of a panicked thief. This seemed personal. To understand the events of that night, detectives painstakingly reconstructed Constance's final hours. On the evening of February the 27th, she'd attended a friendly society meeting at St Mark's Community Centre, a short distance from her home. Witnesses described her as cheerful, chatting with friends about upcoming events. She left the centre at 6:15 p.m, walking partway home with a neighbour before they parted ways at Libertas Road. From there, Constance's house was a mere 5-minute walk. 5 minutes? That was all it took for her to vanish into the fog. Investigators believe she made it home and locked the door behind her. She likely set her purse on the counter, turned on the television, and settled into her chair, unaware that she was no longer alone. Detective Chief Superintendent Don Holland, leading the case, quickly ruled out a random burglary. This killer had come prepared. The weapon, a hatchet or axe, was brought to the scene. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks or windows. This suggested one of two scenarios. Either Constance willingly let her killer inside, or they followed her, slipping in before the door could close. But who could she have trusted enough to open the door late at night? The missing items, a pension book, jewellery, and a few personal trinkets felt like a red herring. Why would a thief needlessly escalate to such barbaric violence? The attack felt too emotional, too deliberate. The weather that night became a conspirator in the crime. The thick fog muffled sound and obscured vision, cloaking the killer's movements. No neighbours reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. The streets were deserted, the usual bustle of Roman road replaced by a ghostly stillness. The fog didn't just conceal the killer, it amplified the fear that gripped the community in the days that followed. As the investigation unfolded, theories began to take shape. Some believed the killer was someone Constance knew, a neighbour or acquaintance familiar with her routines. The lack of forced entry supported this theory, as did her trusting nature. Others speculated the attack might have been linked to her involvement in the friendly society. Did someone mistakenly believe she carried cash or valuable records that night? And then there was the darkest theory of all, that the killer was a predator who struck at random, someone who watched her from the shadows, following her home and seizing the moment to strike. Despite exhaustive efforts, the case grew cold. The single fingerprint found at the scene didn't match any of the 1,200 sets collected during the investigation. The weapon was never recovered. Roadblocks, interviews, and public appeals yielded no solid leads. Months later, another elderly woman in nearby Bristol was murdered under eerily similar circumstances. Was it the same killer? Or was it a copycat? For Constance's family, the pain has never faded. Her grandchildren, now adults, live with the shadow of her violent death, the unanswered questions gnawing at them like an open wound. Detectives believe someone, somewhere, holds the key to the truth. Whether it's a buried memory, a whispered confession, or a tiny detail overlooked, justice remains tantalizingly out of reach. As the years pass, the odds of solving the case grow slimmer, yet cold cases have a way of reigniting when least expected. A breakthrough could come from modern forensic technology, a chance discovery, or the courage of someone finally stepping forward. Someone like you. Constance Aris was more than a victim. She was a mother, a grandmother, a friend. Her life ended in violence, but her memory endures. If you know anything, no matter how small, it's not too late. Please come forward for Constance, for her family, for the truth. If you have any information about tonight's or any of the cases that we feature, please contact your local authorities. Stay safe, and until next time, keep questioning, keep searching, and keep unraveling the mysteries of our world. Because time, like a merciless predator, marches on, leaving behind shattered dreams and broken promises. Yet, amidst those shadows of despair, glimmers of hope remain. Join us next time as we delve into another chilling mystery that continues to confound investigators and haunt communities. Until then, stay vigilant and never forget those who've been lost to the shadows. Until next week, stay safe. Remember, the truth may be hidden, but as long as we keep the investigation alive, it's never truly lost. I'm Brett, and I'll see you next time on Sunday Night Mystery. But for now, stay curious, stay vigilant, and be sure to guard yourself against the darkness that surrounds us all. I'll see you next week on Sunday Night Mystery.